Part 3, Chapter 2. The rumbling was subdued and steady, a sound not unlike the wind howling outside the station, but softer. It came from one of the many hallways that connected the multiple rooms and storage sections of the compound. Slowly, it moved towards the recreation room. Ears took note of its approach, but none of the assembled men then bothered to turn around towards it. The noise was well known to all of them, and no cause for alarm. Knowles skidded to a flashy stop in one of the doorways and braced himself against the jamb. His legs shifted alternately as he balanced himself on the roller skates and stared at the others. "I heard." His eyes took in the body still lying on the card tables. "So what's it mean?" "Nobody knows yet," Fuchs told him. "You got any ideas?" "Sure." The cook grinned at the young biologist. "Maybe we're at war with Norway." Palmer wasn't much older than Knowles. He'd finally gotten control of his hair. It hung down his back in a single fall, secured with a single rubber band. He smiled at the cook's joke as he lit up a joint. A funny smile was Palmer's. He was something else with machinery and not a bad pilot, but from time to time he had a little trouble communicating with other human beings. Episodes from a slightly radical past, most during the 60s, occasionally rose up to haunt him, chemically as well as physically. He inhaled crisply, turning the smile on Gary. The two were social opposites, but they got along okay. In a place like the station, you had to get along. Gary and Palmer did so because neither took the other too seriously. "Was wondering when El Capitan was going to get a chance to use his pop gun." Gary rebuked him with a stern look and turned to face Fuchs. The biologist was still studying the large map. "How long have they been stationed there? You said you didn't think they'd been set up for very long." Fuchs walked away from the map and began rummaging through a box file. He pulled a card out of its middle. "Says here, about 8 weeks. Dr. Copper entered the room. Bennings was right behind him, limping rather more severely than the wound demanded. Gary looked doubtful. "Relative newcomers. 8 weeks. That's not enough time for guys to go bonkers." "Bullshit, sweetheart." Knowles kicked at the floor with his skates, making the wheels spin. 5 minutes is enough to put a man over the edge here, if he doesn't have his head set on straight when he arrives." "Damn straight," agreed Palmer. He was beginning to look blissful. Gary didn't give a damn. Palmer did his work. "I mean," Knowles continued, noticing the remnants of the tobaccoless cigarette and connecting it with the expression now slowly spreading over the mechanic's face. "Palmer's been the way he is since the first day." Palmer's smile grew wider, and he flipped a bird towards the cook. It depends on the individual. Copper's tone was more serious than the cook's, though the sentiment was the same. Sometimes personality conflicts combined with related problems engendered by confinement and isolation can manifest themselves with surprising speed. Gary considered this and spoke to Fuchs. Does it say how many in their permanent party? Fuchs glanced back at the half-extracted card and pursed his lips. If this is up to date, they apparently started with just 6. So there'd be 4 back at the camp. That's not necessarily valid any longer, said Copper quietly. Everyone's attention shifted to the camp doctor. Meaning what, Doc? Wondered Bennings. Meaning that we don't know when our 2 visitors went over the edge, or why, or if they had mental company. Even if they acted alone, guys as crazy as that. And he gestured meaningfully towards the motionless body on the card tables. Could have done a lot of damage in their own neighborhood before getting to us. Which might be another reason why Sanders can't raise their camp on the radio. They might only be monitoring their own transmissions, Norris pointed out. Copper looked doubtful. Every modern European speaks a little English. They'd at least acknowledge, I'd think. Gary looked back at the tables. He didn't speak any English. Stress of the moment, Copper suggested. At such times, people usually can only think in their native tongue. The station manager turned away, muttering unhappily. If what you say is true about them doing damage to their own camp, there's not much we can do about it. Oh yes, there is, the doctor countered. I'd like to go over there. Maybe I can help someone. Maybe I can even find some answers. In this weather. The doctor turned to the man standing closest to him. Bennings, what about the weather? The meteorologist considered. I'd like to make a fresh check on the instruments, but according to the last readings I took, the wind's supposed to let up a tad over the next few hours. A tad. Gary gave him a hard look. Bennings fidgeted. Gimme a break, Chief. Trying to predict the winter weather down here is like trying to find ice cubes in London. It's always a crapshoot. But that's my best guess, based on the most recent info. What's your opinion of the doc's idea? I wouldn't care to do it myself. He moved to inspect the wall map. But it should be a reasonable haul. Even taking the winds into account, I figure less than an hour there, hour back. Gary mulled the idea over, not liking it much. But he desperately wanted some explanations before both the weather and official inquiries started to come in. Besides which, as Copper had pointed out, there might be injured needing help at the Norwegian station. What would the official reaction be if he didn't make an effort to help them? Palmer took the last hit off his joint. "Shit, Doc. I'd give you a lift if—" Gary interrupted him sharply. "Forget it, Palmer." He turned back to Copper, who was waiting patiently for a decision. "Doc, you're a pain in the ass." "Only when I'm giving certain injections." "Oh, hell." The station manager turned away to hide his smile. "Norris, go get McCready." A few easy laughs filled the room. Norris grinned at his superior. "McCready ain't going nowhere. Bunkered in till spring. Who says humans can't hibernate?" "Never ready, McCready," Bennings said. Gary looked bored. "Just go get him." "You're the boss, boss." Norris headed towards the door. "Anyway, he's probably ripped. Palmer will have to go anyhow." Despite familiarity bred of constant repetition, it took Norris several minutes to prepare himself to go outside. Slogging along beneath 65 pounds of extra clothing, he made his way towards the outside door. Wind hammered at his face as he pulled the door aside. Instinctively, he held his lips apart so the saliva in his mouth wouldn't freeze them together. Ice particles rattled on his snow goggles. Maybe Bennings was right. It seemed as he started up the stairs that the wind had let up slightly. Wind chill factor had fallen from the rapidly fatal to the merely intimidating. Of course, they had yet to experience a real winter storm. They were still basking in comparatively mild autumn weather. His destination was a shack 100 yards from the main compound, connected to it by guide ropes and a wooden walkway. 100 yards on foot in the Antarctic seemed like 100 miles, even when the hiker is blessed by the presence of a visible destination. He emerged from the stairs leading down into the central building and started along the boardwalk, his gloved hands sliding easily on the familiar slickness of the guide rope. A few icicles dropped from it and broke off as his sliding fingers made contact with them. He used the rope not only to guide himself, but to pull his way up the slight slope. Here, arms had to complement legs that had a tendency to go on strike, even after brief exposure to the bitter cold. It was comfortably warm inside the shack, which had double walls and radiant electric heat. McCready kept it as tropical as regulations would allow. He hated the cold, hated it even worse than Sanders. Isolation he didn't mind. The mitigating factor was the pay, which was astounding. He took the ice cubes from the little refrigerator and dropped them into the glass. Amber liquid of impressive potency sloshed around the cubes. "Bishop to night 4, said a calm voice that wasn't his. He sipped at his whiskey and walked over to the table holding the game. A large, gaily coloured Vera Cruz sombrero hung from his neck and bounced gently against his back. He bent to duck the naked light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The shack was small, individualistic, and furnished in contemporary, unkempt. Gary called it a pigsty. Macready preferred the description lived in. It was a point the station manager didn't press. Macready did his work. Usually. Several large posters of warm places provided interior colour. Naples, Rio, Jamaica, Acapulco. 1 blonde and 2 redheads. It was hot enough in the shack to make you sweat. The electronic chessboard on the table was larger than the average model. Macready sat down and chuckled over his opponent's bad move. Poor little son of a bitch. You're starting to lose it, aren't you? He thought a moment, then tapped in his move. The machine's response was immediate. Pawn takes queen at knight 4. Electronically manipulated pieces quivered slightly as they shuffled across the board. Macready's grin slowly faded as he examined the new alignment. Someone was pounding on his door. He ignored the noise while brooding over his next move. Finally entering the instructions. Again, pieces shifted. Rook to knight 6, said the implacable voice from the board's internal speaker. Check. The pounding was getting insistent. Macready's teeth ground together as he glared at the board. He bent forward and opened a small flap on the side of the playing field. Coloured circuitry stared back at him as he dumped the remnants of his drink over them. Snapping and popping burst from the machine, followed by a flash of sparks and very little smoke. Bishop to pawn 3, takes rook to queen 5, king to bishop 2, move pawn to pawn, 6 to pawn 7, the passed 8 to pawn 9 to pawn, to pawn to pawn, to pawn. Macready listened until the gibberish stopped, then rose and stumbled towards the door, mumbling disgustedly to himself. Cheating bastard. Damn aberrant programming. Better get my money back. Carefully, he cracked open the door. Heat burst past him, sucked towards the South Pole. Norris pushed through and past him, a rush of snow following like a white remora. You jerking off or just pissed? The geophysicist growled, slapping at his sides. Why the hell didn't you open up? Macready said nothing, but gestured towards the still smoking board. We got any replacement modules for those chess things down in supply? How the hell would I know? Get your gear on. The chess game was suddenly forgotten. Macready regarded his visitor with sudden suspicion. What for? What do you think for? Oh no. he started backing away from Norris. No way. Not a chance. Gary says, I don't give a shit what Gary says. Outside, the wind howled. To MacReady, it sounded hungry. Childs had one of the big torches out and was keeping it close to his body as he melted ice from the helicopter's rotors and engine cowling. Of all the outside jobs, melting off machinery was one of the most pleasurable. At least you could keep yourself defrosted along with the equipment. The wind howled around him as he worked. He glanced skyward. Despite Benning's assurances, he didn't envy whoever had to take the chopper up. No one would, unless Copper insisted. Childs smiled to himself. Plump old Doc Copper usually got his way. Because once he proposed something, none of the other macho types could very well back out without looking silly. He turned his attention back to the nearly de-iced copter and cut frozen water from its landing gear.